First of all, welcome everybody to one of the city's fine All In for Climate Action Week events. We're very pleased that you've been able to join us tonight to have a discussion about a most unique film in these days of disappointment and disillusion and pessimism. This was a bright spot in the universe. As the producer put it, he said this movie is fact-based dreaming, which I really liked the way he put that. The sponsors for this evening's event are the Multi-Faith Network for Climate Justice, which is a faith-based organization representing over 20 Bellingham faith and wisdom traditions that have joined forces, merged to address the climate crisis and social justice issues that are intertwined with it. And we meet on a monthly basis, in person until COVID, and now we've been meeting on Zoom. The other host for this event is the Pickford. We're very grateful for the Pickford's involvement. It's just they're such a benevolent force in this community. They found this, they supported our efforts and got this movie made available to you for free. We also have several co-sponsors. Actually, we have 12 of them, and I've put them in the chat function so you can see who they are at your leisure. But most of the environmental organizations, the City of Bellingham, resources, Western Washington University, Still Point at Beckside, St. Paul's Creation Care Ministry, and the Seaholm High School have all co-sponsored us. So we're very grateful to all of them as well. Before I introduce our speaker, local well-known climate scientist, David Roberts, I'm going to have Seth Vidania, who represents the city. He's here to give you to share a couple things about the All In Week with you before we get started. So Seth?
Thanks, Betsy. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Seth Vidania. I'm helping the Bellingham community and the city government demonstrate leadership in climate action. I work as the climate and energy manager for Bellingham, and we're really excited to have the Multi-Faith Network for Climate Justice and the Pickford and all the other hosts that Betsy mentioned as the host for this event today as part of our second annual Climate Week. This week, if you've been on and viewing really any part of it, you know that this is a celebration of all the knowledge, the progress, and the resources that our community has to offer when looking for solutions to address global climate change at our local level. Our awesome community has put together a great list of events. Most of them have happened. We do have one more tomorrow night, Climate Squares. If you're a fan of the old game show Hollywood Squares and you'd like to see folks up on the hot seat, including Mayor Fleetwood, tune in tomorrow. That information's on the All In website at the City of Bellingham. It's going to be really fun. It turned out really nice. So thanks everyone for being here. And I'll just put out a personal call. My calendar is not going to like me for doing this, but if you want to chat about what we can do to help the Bellingham community demonstrate climate leadership, please contact me. My email is real easy. It's just right on my screen, seth.vidana@cob.org. Love to chat with you. I'm a resource for you. So please let me know if you have any ideas or you want to talk about what we're up to. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Seth, would you put your contact information in the chat function on the chat page? And maybe the Bellingham Challenge, how to access the Bellingham Challenge.
You got it, Betsy.
Thank you. Okay. All right, well, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to someone most of you already know well. We're so grateful that he lives here in Bellingham. He's a well-known local expert on climate change, our own David Roberts, environmental scientist. He is the co-owner and president of Colson Services, which offers climate and sustainability planning for business, community groups, and governments. He recently facilitated the work of the City of Bellingham's Climate Action Task Force, who provided specific recommendations to the city for meeting its aspirational climate goals. Thank you very much, David, for your willingness to moderate this conversation about this most important film.
That's great, Betsy. Thank you. I'm happy to be here tonight. Good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for participating in this little event. I think you'll all agree that 2040 was a hopeful film. Hope combined with commitment for action is what we all need right now. Each day that passes, the imperative for action is more real and critical. Seeing firsthand that many options are already available points the way to a more hopeful future, one where opportunities are feasible, effective, just, and economically sound. So tonight we're going to give you an opportunity to share and learn in a variety of fun ways to get you thinking. There'll also be an opportunity to ask questions and then at the end make a personal commitment to action. So before we start, I don't know if we have a thumbs up option available or not, but if you enjoyed the film, wave your hand. See how it is, like this, okay? Yep, excellent. All right, well, as you have seen in the media and observed out your window, severe storms, flooding, and drought are increasingly impacting communities and ecosystems across the United States. This summer in the West, we all experienced terrible destructive fire and very unhealthy air quality. The South, of course, has already had an unprecedented number of hurricanes and storms. And yet, there are many who doubt that climate change has anything to do with extreme conditions. It is a complex scientific story for sure, but much of this doubt sown through social media and promoted by leaders with near-term agendas. And I also blame people who bring us the daily weather, who are ill-equipped to discuss the climate crisis, something that's clearly outside of their expertise. So given the disruptions many Americans are experiencing, I invite you to share your thoughts in the chat right now. Excuse me here, I'm going to bring up my chat so I can put something in there for you. Concerning the following question: how much do you think our recent weather and fire conditions are changing the thinking about climate across the country? I'm going to post this in here, and you've got a way to answer this question by indicating with a 0 if you don't think there's any impact, plus if you think there's slightly more, 2 pluses if there's much more, and then if you think the impact of these is strictly localized, put a pound sign in there, and then let's see what you all think for everybody. So go ahead and show that right now. And it looks like I need to send that to all of you just to make sure you get it. So it looks like a lot of people are saying, probably didn't affect too much, or maybe just a little bit. Some along the coastal states. Anyone else want to leave an answer in the chat? It certainly is interesting to see where we live. So in our part of the world, we're obviously impacted, but other people don't necessarily see the impact that we experience. And I think it's always ironic to think that we see something in the media, and then before you know it, there's some other issue that comes up and we've forgotten about the people who are still suffering from whatever went on there. So a few more people saying maybe 2 stars, two plus marks there, much more. All right. So now we're going to try, oh, we got some people still coming in. Just slightly more. Hard to tell. It's always mentioned by those I talk to. There's another sector of the country I don't understand. So as you'll see, we're going to have a series of these little interactions, and now we're going to do a breakout room. But before we do that, I just wanted to mention the 2040 film proposed 5 solutions to climate change that are understood and doable right now, or at least in the very near future. They were changes in our energy systems, primarily distributed networks and solar and wind generation or renewable generation. They talked about self-driving or autonomous electric cars, regenerative agriculture, marine permaculture, and educating girls. And I'm going to put these again in the chat here. And I want you to think about those different solutions that were proposed there. Each of these moves us towards a more hopeful future. And I want you to think about which of these solutions we could focus on in Whatcom County or your community if you live somewhere else. So we're going to randomly organize you into 3-person breakout rooms for about 5 minutes of sharing with each other. Once you're together, I invite you to answer the question, which solution from the film could we start to implement in our community today, and what will it take to get there? So here you go there. And then Steve, do you want to do the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I think we're going to lose, you won't be able to see the chat once you go into the breakout rooms, but I may be wrong about that.
Okay, can you copy that into the breakout room message then?
Yeah, I'll see. I don't know if I have to do it.
Yeah,
10
okay.
rooms. So there'll be 7 rooms. Here we go.
Okay.
Hi, Alan. Everybody's out in breakout rooms. I can send you one.
Oh, if you don't mind, that'd be great. I just got off of that Public Trust movie that was playing at 5:30 to 5 to 6:30.
Okay, okay. Let me see if I
Is
can,
there a-
let me see if I can.
If not, yeah, I can catch up with you later, but I'll just stay on the line here.
We're just in.
We're just in for
5 minutes.
for 5 minutes here.
Perfect.
I'm not all that
All that
experienced
experience,
managing this kind of stuff.
managing kind of stuff.
I don't see how to
Let's see how to
put you in one. Oh,
put
here
you
we go.
in.
Well, you know, it's okay. I could just catch up when they all reconvene.
Okay, I'm going to send you into
I'm
room.
gonna send you in a room.
Oh, there we go. Thanks.
Ryan, I'm going to send you into room 7, where they can explain what's going on.
Is everybody back, Steve?
Well, it looks like we got 23 people here.
Okay, very good. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a great visit. I'd like to invite now someone from each of the groups, if you would take a moment and type into the chat that your 1 or 2 favorite ideas of things that we could pursue here in Whatcom County. So go ahead and type that into the chat and share it with everybody. There's Diane, regenerative agriculture and marine permaculture. Another agriculture, both again, regenerative agriculture, marine, expanding solar and wind power use. more ocean permaculture, and regenerative agriculture. Those two are sounding like a lot of people go for that. Renewable energy and car sharing, more energy and solar, plant-based diet sneaking in there, of course, it's good. Clean energy transport, and domestic energy, wind and solar. Bring in some expert like the one in the movie to teach us how to do agriculture more sustainably. Yeah, I think that's a cultural change for sure in our agricultural community. Car sharing and decentralized microgrids. Welcome, Phoebe. See you out there.
Hi,
All
David.
right.
And I just, if I may, I earlier pasted a link to the scientists' warning of a climate emergency, who's 6, which I co-authored, as you know, which included 6 priorities very similar to the priorities advanced by Damon in his film. So it's an important reinforcement, I think, of priorities. I'll get the link back and put it in again so people don't have to search for it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, it looks like regenerative agriculture and decentralized energy were a real big thing, and all, as well as to support the ocean permaculture. So very good. Those are all great ideas for our community. So thank you for that. And I hope that was a creative conversation for all of you. One of the solutions shared in the film was for autonomous electric vehicles. And that one didn't pop up as anything as what we could do immediately as a community, but obviously that technology is just on the horizon, and many people even that are driving Teslas experience some of that right now. As many of you know, the internal combustion engine is a huge contributor to our global and national greenhouse emissions. They also contribute significantly to noise and water pollution. Electric vehicles could change this dramatically, saving money and using 70% less energy along the way. I wanted to share a little experience that my wife and I had when we were in China at this time last year. And we visited a city called Liandu, which is in the eastern part of China. Population is about 300,000 people, and it was one of the quietest and cleanest cities we've ever visited, both from the streets and the air quality, as far as the cleanliness goes. And it was all for one reason. Almost all the buses, cars, and scooters were electric. Second thought here to share with you is about autonomous vehicles and safety. Many of us already have autonomous features such as proximity sensors and lane deviation alarms in our cars. These are just one step away from fully autonomous equipment, and today make driving substantially more safe. I like to think a fully autonomous vehicle would actually have a brain that talks to all the vehicles around us and keeps everyone in their place. No cell phones, no road rage, no speeding, just relax and let the car do most of the work. So here's your chance to share some thoughts on electric and autonomous vehicles. If you currently have drive a hybrid or electric vehicle, please raise your hand. And Betsy, can you get a sense of how many people have that kind of a vehicle right now?
Keep your hands up. Well, there's some people that I can't see, and maybe they could use a reaction hand, but otherwise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and maybe Bonnie, Leslie, Bill, Ryan, and C.W. Cole, if you could use the reaction button and just put a thumbs up or something in there, I could count you as well. C.W. Cole has an autonomous vehicle as well.
Yeah.
And so does
As
Bill.
a hybrid, yes. Well, that's great. See, we're already on the way to better emissions and
That's
people.
That's 9 out of 23.
That's
So
awesome.
that's
Awesome. So now in the chat box, please share a few words about what excites you most about autonomous vehicles. So So I'll just put this in here right now for everyone. So what are things that excite you about the possibility of having autonomous vehicles in the future? Go ahead and enter your thoughts in the chat box. Using less energy. Transforming transportation from a good to a service. Yes. Quiet, clean, and safe. It's lovely. Wouldn't it be great to get rid of parking lots? That's one of the factors that Tony Seba talks about when you look at his other videos. Less energy, more safety, reduction in carbon and noise, detached from egos. Yeah, if all the cars looked the same, it wouldn't matter, would it? Don't have to turn in the keys when you get old. That's a big thing for especially those of us who are aging, that will have actually more mobility in the future. Claire's not excited about cars in general, and that's a good thing too, because maybe we can get to the point where we have quite a few less cars in the future if we get to an autonomous kind of situation. And not having to own one would be lovely. You know, General Motors is looking at now in the future being essentially a leasing company, or could even compete against Uber. Fewer accidents, even pace, no speeders, less energy, fewer parking spaces. What would we do with all the space if we didn't have parking? As Betsy suggests, municipal gardens, or maybe housing. So those are all great things. So now I know that you can't get away from all of the concerns. So maybe we'll just take a moment, and those of you who have concerns about autonomous electric vehicles, go ahead and register what those might look like. Thank you, Phoebe, for converting parking lots into wetlands or gardens. Yeah, it's hard to give up control for some folks, that's for sure. You need some clean electricity. That's definitely on the horizon, and people are still concerned about the reliability, even though we as individual drivers who can't talk to other drivers are fairly unreliable too. The holdup, I think Betsy's probably still, proving out the technology and dealing with things like kids running out in the street and that type of thing. Push for solar vehicles reinforces the delusion that we can solve this problem without changing our lifestyle substantially. Of course, having cars in the first place is something that we have to get beyond. And maybe we get to a place where we're more of a Uber type society. Yeah, emergency situations. And of course, we are going to need a lot more electricity if we're going to electrify not only our vehicles, but also all of our buildings. And of course, there will be an impact of making all of those new cars. Hopefully, we'll be able to recover the materials from our old cars, as well as anything that comes from the batteries that are generated in the future. I can't help think that after the value of all the rare earths and other metals that go into batteries, that we won't have that be a major industry in the future. We simply won't be able to afford to throw that kind of thing away. A shared service is my dream. Just call somebody and have them take me away. Thank you. Solar roads, that'd be a cool thing, wouldn't it? Yeah. Big deep sea mining for some of those metals, that's true. Well, thank you. That was great. Very thoughtful input on that particular question. And obviously, I think certainly electric cars will be part of the future. And at some point, we won't even have to own a car. If you believe Tony Seba's projections and his, at least his 2017 or 18 video, he talks about that within 10 to 12 years of our time right now, there'll be no reason for us to actually own a car. So I'm interested to see where that all goes. So, well, we're going to shift gears here now from equipment and ideas about big things and talk about how we relate to other people. We all know people who don't believe humans are impacting our climate. And I'm also confident you know others who just generally resist any kind of change. Many people feel overwhelmed with climate anxiety, which the directors tried to overcome in 2040 by focusing on positive solutions that are already available. Consider the ideas you heard discussed in the film and how you could communicate some of those ideas with others in your life. Now we're going to return to breakout rooms again for another 5 minutes. And you may be with different people this time, but that should be fun, meet some new folks. In your small group, I invite you to answer the following question, which I'll paste down here below. What positive language can you use to encourage your family, friends, and neighbors to live a more sustainable lifestyle that motivates them, not pressures them? Make note of those ideas you find particularly useful that you and others share. And please give everybody a chance to talk if that's possible during your time. So if everybody's ready, Steve, can you go ahead and put them into breakout rooms, please? Well, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a fruitful conversation with everybody else in your group. I'm anxious to see your thoughts now on a few words describing what you believe you can do to motivate your family, friends, and neighbors to live a more sustainable life. So take a moment right now, think about that, and then put it in the chat. Let's see what everybody came up with. Kristen, I hope you put that comment you shared with us. That was a good one. Listening and finding common ground first. Talk to them about their grandchildren. I love that one. Try and get them to project forward. Lead by example. Do rather than talk, then talk. Listening. Listening to concerns. Ask what kind of world they want to leave their grandchildren. How do we do that? Lots about listening, and I think that's certainly really important. I wanted to, I was hoping that Kristen would put on here. She had a great one that was about hear the biography, not the ideology. Really think about what's going on in their life and less about their ideological positions. Oh boy, we need a mass extinction event. Thank you, Alan. Know your audience and appeal to their sense of right and wrong. Positive solutions already working and available to help the pocketbook, health, and planet. Yes, you know, Kelsey was sharing her specific example of being able to say, well, we thought about buying a Nissan Leaf and a used one. And when we did the numbers, it actually worked out that it was very cost effective and convenient for us. So telling your personal story is great. Appeal to their enlightened self-interest. Absolutely, Betsy. Very good. Well, if you have other thoughts, go ahead and share them in there. But to keep on schedule here, we're going to move on to some question and answer. So I'm going to turn it over to Betsy now. And if you have a question, she'll field that for you. Go ahead, Betsy.
Yeah, actually, David just mentioned that's what we're going to be doing next. Do you have any questions, not only about what we've discussed so far tonight together, or questions or comments you had as a result of watching this interesting movie? What we're going to do is have you post your question in the chat function. So if there are 21 of you, maybe we'll even get 21 questions or comments that you would like to have further discussed. And I'll make sure that David gets them. So go ahead now and take a moment to compose your thoughts and post a question or a comment on the chat function. Okay. Here's one for you, David. This is actually a really interesting one. How do we stop the massive destructive power of the fossil fuel companies?
Well, that is obviously the multi-billion-dollar question that the world faces right now. And there's a couple of things. There may be actually some hope on the horizon there. Obviously, if you've been watching the news, you've seen that BP and Shell are both looking at how they value their assets right now and significantly devaluing what's left in the ground, the resources that they can still use. So I think that we're going to begin to see some big changes out there as the demand for fuel shifts with electric vehicles. And I think I sense even in the last couple of weeks, there's been kind of a sea change in attitudes for both the oil companies and the power companies. The business association, big business association of the United States, entities have come out and said that they're now working towards some kind of a carbon tax oriented process. There are broader questions that are opportunities, like a concept called quantitative easing, which is what we did with the car companies. We basically almost bought out controlling interests in the car companies when things were tough during the Obama administration, and then let them buy them back again. And this is another possibility for the oil companies that would keep them whole, keep their investors whole, and ultimately secure the fossil fuel in the ground. So there's a few thoughts anyway.
Hey, and I'd like to just add to what you mentioned, David. In the movie, they were talking about using the money that we give, I think it's how many hundreds of millions of dollars a day, to the fossil fuel industry in terms of tax breaks. You
Yeah.
use that money to train union fossil fuel workers to get trained for the jobs of the future in renewable energy.
And right
Now-
now, we need those fossil fuel workers to go out and plug the methane leaks that are going on all around the world. We have horrific methane releases going on, and I have a personal belief that that might be why things are accelerating right now.
Okay, there's so many questions here, David. I'm gonna try to get to them all, but here's one that's really interesting. Diane asks if Bellingham or Whatcom County is moving forward with donut economics as a local strategy of organizing people to work together.
I think there are a lot of great things going on in Bellingham, and I think it's starting to expand out into Whatcom County. Certainly the efforts of the Climate Action Task Force had a big component of social responsibility in the conversation, and make sure that while we move forward, we were able to consider the impacts that would have on various aspects of our community. I think we have a long way to go, though, and really have only begun to scratch the surface in terms of a more equitable balance in the community. And many of the things that were discussed in the show are things that we should be exploring even further. I think overall as a country, we still are very much an I-oriented world, and we're a long way from thinking about others as an important part of our long-term survivability.
A couple of people have mentioned the power grid. The part of the story in 2040, the Bangladeshi power grid, and how they're actually in our breakout session, we talked about how that little village is ahead of us already. I'm wondering if that could be implemented or scalable here.
Well, we're certainly, as we did the work of the Climate Action Task Force, we looked at how that could be implemented in the city of Bellingham. It's obviously a major, with the systems that we have, it's a major rewiring of how things are set up. But having that kind of security and interdependence is certainly a noble objective to go after. I love the fact that people could actually monetize their production when they weren't using it, and it certainly is a way of providing energy independence and control to people within the city. I personally have solar panels on my house. I'm lucky enough to have been able to afford those, and I'm plugged back into the PSE network right now. But of course, it's a big grid, and who knows where those electrons go. But I really like the idea of building community around a renewable source like that, and I think we definitely are the kind of place that's open to that kind of work. So I hope it's pursued further in the future.
A couple of people asked about aqua permaculture. One of the questions is do you know if there's any aqua permaculture going on anywhere around here? And a related question is, if this seaweed sequesters so much carbon, what would be the health effects on humans by ingesting all that carbon?
Right. There's definitely some beginnings of aquaculture in this form in Washington. There's a great deal of interest in how growing of various kinds of algae can help to balance the pH issues that are going on in Puget Sound. There's some examination and testing of kind of co-growing algae and shellfish in the same waters to see if we can reduce the impact of acidification on the shellfish operations. For a while we were looking into that, but as a company we were looking into it, but it's still very complicated from a permitting and an operational standpoint. That being said, I feel like any of these ideas right now look complicated, but when things get really nasty out there, I have a feeling that we're going to be able to figure out how to get over some of those hurdles. As far as the human side of and the contamination aspect of seaweeds, there's a Jenny Hahn from Bellingham is just finishing up a master's research on seaweed and the potential health effects of that, primarily for the tribal communities in Puget Sound. And I don't have the exact results on that, but that is being looked at, and it's certainly something to be considered in looking at the potential for a food source for humans. There are other potential food sources as well for animals and for fertilizers and a variety of other uses as well. So I think we'll be learning more about that in the future.
Thank you. We have a couple other questions. Here's one from David Ketter. I'll just read it to you. It's a little bit lengthy. David, how do you account for the difference between those scientists and activists who think that we can make a transition to renewable energy in time and avoid serious impacts from the climate crisis, and those who say that even if we go full speed ahead with this transition, we will need to substantially reduce our standard of living in order to get there? What is your opinion? How do you account for this difference, and what's your?
Well, I think that there's a number of considerations in this question. Obviously, if we are going to electrify everything, then we're going to need a lot more capacity to do that. And at the same time, there are enormous opportunities for efficiencies out there that could result in a reduction in overall demand. So we've got kind of, if you're looking at total energy, and that ultimately the demand could go down if we did a better job of running our energy systems in our buildings, and then of course converting from gas-powered vehicles to electric vehicles. There is another issue, which is whether we actually have a pipeline big enough from the areas where we largely have the most renewable energy, which is over in Eastern Washington, and being able to get it to Western Washington where the greatest demand is going to be. So there are some fairly major logistical questions there that I think need to be fully vetted, and I think that we're only beginning to get a sense of what the full model situation is ultimately going to look like. I don't know if that gets at all of David's question there, but certainly there are a lot of questions still out there, but there should be no reason why we are not pursuing renewable energy at the greatest speed that we can. Of course, there are some places where it's more cost effective to generate it, and Eastern Washington right now is by far the best in terms of wind and solar. Geothermal, tidal, other things like that might be better or additional options for Western Washington.
Thank you. No, actually, Steve Hansen has an interesting question. Reducing population seems the key we don't discuss. And actually, that was touched on in this movie as one of the main ways to save our Earth is to educate girls and make sure they're educated on reproductive rights, have some decisions over their reproductive decisions. More people multiplied by even lower per person consumption still leaves us with a larger total population.
Yeah, larger total consumption too.
Oh,
And
total consumption.
Yeah, and interestingly, I've been looking at some statistics recently, and the real sticking point in the world is actually Africa right now. Many countries, including China and even India's growth rate is slowing substantially, although India is projected to be higher population than China at some point in the future. But there are some people now looking at the overall trends across the world as a declining population overall, except for in Africa. And the only question now is, in the long haul, will Africa ultimately outpace everybody else? And of course, back to what Betsy just said, we're really at this place where educating young girls is going to be, as is indicated in Drawdown, it will be one of the major steps that we can do to empower women to have less children and to be more economically viable in the communities that they live in. So obviously we can't continue to grow the way we grow right now. I think one of the things we spent quite a bit of time talking about when we were in China is a different aspect of this. It's that you still have an enormous population in China, which it hasn't quite leveled out yet, but eventually will. And in part because there are so many men and so few women in China now. And but the families that are there now want everything that we want. So even though their population is not necessarily expanding at the rate it was, their consumption rate as a result of bringing 800 million people out of poverty over the last 25 years has resulted in a massive impact on our resource systems. And I think that is every bit as important as our population at this point. If everybody wants what we want, we're going to need a couple more planets to get there.
Oh. Actually, there's some online websites you can go to figure out how many planets would be required if everyone on Earth wanted to live like we do. And it's usually several planets, multiplied by several planets. Diane asks if we've made sufficient efforts to ensure that disadvantaged members of the community have been part of the sustainability conversation. And if not, any ideas on how we can accomplish this? And at this point, I'm remembering that triple bottom line that became part of the Climate Action Task Force, became part of their guidelines and their way of creating their recommendations. So that's that touches on this a little bit. I'm wondering if you could address Diane's question and also describe triple bottom line for some of us who might not know what that is.
Yes, so in the Climate Action Task Force's work, we were asked to evaluate the environmental, social, and economic impacts of each of the solutions that were recommended by the task force. And in addition to that, we were asked to look at whether the particular suggestions were technologically feasible at this time or at some point in the future. So a great deal of the concern out of that triple bottom line was to have suggestions that were either directly or indirectly feasible for the community as a whole, including disadvantaged members. And where it didn't appear feasible, then we had to talk about different ways that we could adjust or provide incentives or other mechanisms to support those programs so that it did make it possible for us to move forward in spite of having people who might on the surface be not able to, say, afford a particular type of technology. I think this is, I really admire the city's effort to really pay attention to this type of thing. I do think that the sustainability conversation is primarily within the city, and some efforts in the county through groups like Sustainable Connections, obviously trying to reach out. There's efforts in terms of just food supply and so forth. But I think overall, the question of sustainability is really, we're just really scratching the surface right now, that we are needing a much bigger look at what it's going to take for us to survive and prosper in this county, and to help float all boats, because we obviously have a very difficult situation in terms of even simple things like being able to pay rent and have an adequate income in this community compared to other parts of the state. So I think we're just scratching the surface, and we need to engage a lot more people in that kind of conversation in an effective way.
Thank you, David. Mark Olson has two comments that you might want to have some thoughts about. The first one has to do with seaweed. Thank you, Mark, for sharing what I didn't know about seaweed. It may absorb carbon, but it seems a bit different from the way it works with trees, where wood can be maintained. Won't seafood, I'm guessing that means he means seaweed, simply decay and become neutral on balance?
Yes,
And
I think the point is that if you, as long as you use a tree for something like lumber, then you are sequestering the carbon. The seafood, obviously, or seaweed, if it goes into food, then is certainly pulling CO2 out of the oxygen at the time, and then is consumed, and then depending on what happens to what we consume, might end up back in the atmosphere again. I think one of the interesting things about seaweed is that there are these localized effects on the acidity of the water, and it may ultimately help us restore, at least within places like Puget Sound, the pH that will make it so we can have the kind of shellfish populations that we need. But Obviously, the fate of what happens to seaweed and whether it just goes back into the atmosphere or not is certainly a consideration when compared to growing trees.
Thank you. Good question as well. David Ketter poses another one, and this could be a question that you could answer, David, but perhaps Seth Vidania could weigh in on it as well, because it's a question about what the city might be doing. Last February, Joe McIntyre-Witt, who some of you know is on the leadership team for the Climate Reality Project, Bellingham chapter. She mentioned at a public gathering that the local utilities are thinking about taking over the electricity grid, that a public committee would be formed to address equity issues as the city moves ahead with its climate actions. Is this committee now a reality?
I'll let
And
Seth speak for that one. Obviously, this issue is first and foremost in the discussions about the PUD elections. But Seth, would you like to answer that question if you're still on?
I am still here. Yeah,
Yes.
There he is.
happy to tell you where we're at right now. So there's two parts of that question, and sorry if it's a little loud over here. We've got it's evening time with two little ones here, so it's got a lot of things going on. In terms of the local utilities taking over the electricity grid, the goal really is decarbonization of Bellingham's energy supply. We know that has to happen. There's two strategies to that, or there's really multiple strategies, but the two main ones we're looking at right now are, a partnership with our utility, Puget Sound Energy, for the creation of some sort of resource that would be a low or no carbon resource. So wind and solar are the most likely candidates there. The other one is looking at a PUD or an MUD, municipal utility district, that has other benefits, including local control. What we're seeing right now is that one of those options is a quicker option, at least in our preliminary study right now, that working with PSC would likely get us to a carbon neutral power source more quickly. But again, that's as far as, that's a status report from as far as we've looked into it. I'm 6 months into the job right now. We've got a lot more work to do, but both the PUD idea and linking up with Puget Sound Energy for a resource are two things that we're pursuing simultaneously right now. And we're still in the preliminary stages of that. And then the second item, an equity group that's been formed, or a group that's been formed to address equity issues. I haven't heard about that directly, but we do have both a city climate team and a mayor's climate team that vet a number of the items, or actually all of the items that come through on the climate end of things. And that group is very interested in equity issues. And in the process that some of you may have seen, the climate policy vetting process that I know Claire, who's on the calls, is aware of as well, there are a number of elements within that address equity in particular. And so anything we bring forward to City Council to say, hey, we'd like to look into this deeper, eventually we'll get a triple bottom line analysis. And remember, equity is the third part of that analysis. In our case, it's a TBL plus, that plus being a fourth part, which is technology. Does that technology exist? So equity is a part of what we're doing, but I've yet to see movement on an equity group specifically on that, or it might be happening. I just don't know about it.
Thank you, Seth. I'm wondering if you would also touch on the advisory committee that's now in the process of being formed on yet another, the possibility of yet another utility, and that is broadband internet fiber optics. Yeah,
I'm on the periphery of that one. That conversation's been linked into our climate conversations during this week of events and other events. I really can't speak to that issue very much. I understand the the desire there, understand the perceived benefits, but I don't know enough about that to speak cogently on the climate end of broadband.
I know one of the concerns are the equity issues that have been uncovered by COVID, with kids now being required to learn online, go to school online, and many of them not being able to access the internet because their families don't have the money to pay for internet.
Yeah, and to your earlier question, there is a group that's being formed to look at broadband in general as something that might happen at the city. And I'm not sure, Claire might be able to talk about this, if that group is still accepting applications or not, but I know that they were up until recently, if not now.
Thank you. Claire, did you want to say anything? I don't know if Claire's still on. Yeah, Claire's still on. Claire, did you want to add anything to that, the comments Seth just made?
I guess I would just highlight something that Seth talked about, and that's we were trying to connect the dots between climate issues that we're dealing with and the broadband issue that has been raised here lately, and we understand that there's a lot of connections between issues, but that one really hasn't been connected enough for us to pay a lot of attention to it as a climate issue.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. I think we have one more. Mark Olson asks, says that it seems that the local electric grids would be more promising if the focus is on new communities and housing developments. Rebuilding the existing grid seems like a problem due to cost. Is that correct?
You know, I'm going to let Claire talk about that again, since he's still up there. I don't know that I have a true sense of the cost factors that are in that, but he was a lot closer to that in the project we worked on. You answer that, Claire?
Repeat it for me, though.
Let's see. It seems that the local electric grids would be most promising if the focus is on new communities and housing developments. Rebuilding the existing grid seems like a problem due to cost.
Thanks, David. I don't know if there's the economy of that you're going to realize the benefit of the work by just going after new. I mean, there are some programs where we're focusing on additional housing stock or additional buildings, especially in the electrification of buildings issue. But as far as upgrading the grid or changing the grid and just doing it in new communities, of course you want to do it right when you're building new, but I think we're going to have to look at, for a lot of these issues, we're going to have to look at retrofitting part of our community also. I don't know if that gets at the question, but hopefully it at least touches on it.
There may be times when system upgrades need to be made, and that's the time to think about where those modifications can most benefit everybody by going to a different form. I know that PSE mentioned that they were thinking about that type of thing, at least as a model. So maybe they're running some more detailed economic analyses on them.
Okay, those are all the questions that people have posed so far. I do have a question I didn't post, but I do want to ask, and that is, I'm wondering if there's an update on how quickly we are moving towards developing the infrastructure for electric vehicles. A lot of people I know don't want to buy an electric car because they can't see all the places where they could go to get it charged up. So I know that's not true in California, where you go to any grocery store parking lot and there's whole rows of places you can charge your car. So I'm just wondering, I know the city's made a commitment to that. I'm just wondering where we're at with that. How quickly are we going to be ramping up infrastructure for electric vehicles?
There you go, Claire or Seth, either one of you.
Well, I can talk to a little bit of that. We have a grant in right now that at full realization, I think we're in the 30. I can't remember if it's stations or specific heads, but I think it's stations, a 30 to 35 station increase in the electric vehicle charging arena. And so we're looking at a Department of Commerce grant that would put stations on city-owned properties, allow people to charge their vehicles. But you know, the more we look at this, the more we see that there's a concern about being able to charge vehicles outside of the home. But the reality is, for most people, that's the spot to charge. Most people are making shorter trips, and that's really the best spot, given the length of those trips, for folks to charge their vehicles. And PSC does have some programs that are helping people put charging infrastructure into their homes. Obviously, that works out really well if you're, single, home, and you can, you've got a place you can plug into. But what if you're an apartment? You live in an apartment, or you just don't have that same charging infrastructure. So those challenges there. One of the other big issues really is the cost of these vehicles. There are some folks that have the money to go out and buy electric vehicle, but low and moderate income folks can't really do that. And so we're looking at that as a challenge as well. And might we have some sort of buying cooperative that would allow us to knock a certain portion of that cost off, through buying in bulk, or maybe even a sales tax reduction as well. So there's some options that we're looking at as well.
I do think, Seth, you're right on there. There are obviously people who have to park on the street, and charging is going to be more complicated if you're, in the York neighborhood or something. You're trying to find a parking place anywhere to find a place to charge it. On the other hand, as the batteries get bigger and bigger, the need to actually charge for what most people are driving is relatively infrequent. The other thing to think about is, just like all other cars, the used market is going to be more and more, create more and more opportunities to buy used vehicles. We bought a 2012 Nissan Leaf, and it was relatively inexpensive little car. So, and for the 90% of the driving that we do, we're able to use that car for a around town type of thing. But still a need for people who don't have a charging, otherwise have a charging facility in their garage or at their home. It will require some charging facilities. And I think the greatest need in the future is probably going to be more highway travel charging than anything else. So.
David, I have a little bit to add to that.
Sure, go ahead.
The point that Seth made, and that is, we've got this grant application in, and it's for multiple heads, as Seth said. The city's committed to following through on increasing our infrastructure in the city, regardless of whether we get the grant. If we get the grant, we can do a huge increase in the amount of stations that are available. If we don't get the grant, we'll just be picking away at it over the course of the next couple of years, and still try to increase that infrastructure opportunity for EV owners.
Could you talk about that, one of the recommendations of the task force, which was the community buy? Seth mentioned it. Has anything moved forward on that concept at this point? Bulk buy or fleet purchase?
Seth left. Okay, yeah.
No,
yeah,
I'm still here, Claire.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I should turn it back to you, Seth. Excuse
No,
me.
tag team, that's fine. So was the question, what's moved, what's been the progress with a group buy?
Yeah. Is there any effort in that area?
Yeah, so we're all of these things are in the preliminary research process right now. So thus far, we know that there's other municipalities that have taken on group buy, sales tax reduction. So we know there are example programs out there. We know that the cost of the EVs has been identified as one of the 3 major barriers. And this isn't just in Bellingham, but nationally and internationally, really. And that's where we're at. The next steps would be, once we get the okay from City Council to move, to put more staff time into researching these items, would be to work with local car dealerships to see if they might be interested in partnering with this, finding out from the community who out there would be interested in joining a group buy program. And really the thing that we want to know is, what are the elements of a program that are going to increase the number of EV users out there? Not just the folks who were going to buy one anyway, and this was, it was a timing sort of thing, but folks who could not afford it otherwise. What are the program elements that will allow them to get into EV ownership and reap the rewards, not only health-wise, but financially in terms of operating costs? The first cost is really high, but the operating cost is lower. So how do we decrease that first cost for folks? So to answer your question, we're still in the research phase, and I know that is not great to hear about all these things. But Claire and I and the rest of the city team are really committed to making sure that we're meeting the needs of most in the community, and to do that takes time. And if folks have ideas or any assistance you want to lend, we're open to that. My contact information is in the chat there.
I want to acknowledge, given this COVID world we're in right now, and just the number of recommendations that came from the task force, just how hard people like Seth and Claire are working right now to try and bring these different programs into reality. So I think we owe them a great debt of thanks for all the effort that they're putting in. So Betsy, should we turn it over to you?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for not only the participants for your wonderful questions, but to your wonderful answers. And we are coming close to the end of this one interesting event. David, I know that you have one last question you want people to weigh in on. So we will end our question and answer period now, and you can move on to the next.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll just end it here. I did notice I don't have share. Steve, any chance you could set that up for me, that I'm allowed to share a screen? But while Steve looks into that, now that you've watched the movie and participated in this discussion, we're interested to understand the impact this movie and event have had on you. And so I'm going to put a question here in the chat box for you, and it's, how has your level of hope changed regarding solutions to the climate crisis since you've watched the show and participated tonight? So if you just take a moment and you see 0 if you haven't had any change, 1+ if it's a little less hopeful, 2 for slightly more, and 3 for even more hopeful.
David, I made you the host, so you should have permission now to.
Okay. Let's see if I can. Oh, great. Yep, there it is. Wonderful. So lots of people are certainly slightly more hopeful. Obviously, we have a lot of hurdles to get over, but generally, I see the folks in the crowd here are got some additional hope from watching the movie, and that's great. So before we leave, I promised you that that you'd have an opportunity to make a commitment, and so I'm going to share this screen with you right now, and And on the screen, you see there are 11 potential commitments for action. You see there's a first word to identify each one of them, one being sharing awareness about climate change and solutions with others, which we talked about tonight, writing your legislator and demanding action, eating more plant-based meals, reducing your ecological footprint, growing your own food, reducing food waste, which we know is humongous waste of both food and energy to produce the food, avoiding single-use products, helping educate girls through donation to nonprofits, choosing 100% renewable energy, which is such an easy thing to do, installing solar panels, and reducing your air travel. So what I would like to ask you to do right now is to consider those right there and think, and I know many of you are already doing a lot of these different things, but if there was one additional thing that you could add to what you're doing today, what would that be? And go ahead and put that in the chat. All right. We've got some sharing and some footprints and more plant eating. Lots of people eating less plants. Looking at EV cars as well, that's great. Some folks who are interested in supporting young ladies and getting them educated. Calling the legislators. I think that we need to remember those people really need to know that we support what they're doing and they need to know what we care about. So these are great. Thank you so much for all of your commitments tonight and for being part of this program. So now, Betsy, I think that's it from my end. Appreciated
Yes.
everybody's questions and conversation, and thank you to Seth and Claire for helping out tonight too.
Yes, I actually thank you. Well, thank you first of all, David, for this wonderful, really wonderful Zoom event, very well organized. And to Steve Hansen for being our IT maven once again, making this all look like it's just easy to do. And to our city people who helped us fill in some of the blanks about what's going on here locally. It's all very hopeful. And it was great to see you all. Thank you for coming. It was a pleasure to have you.